Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the anatomy of manipulated science. We usually think of science as this pure, untouched pursuit of absolute truth, right? But what happens when that pursuit gets hijacked by powerful interests? Well, understanding the history of how science gets manipulated completely changes how you look at the information you consume today. We're going to dig into the historical record and see exactly how objective facts have been twisted, suppressed, or totally weaponized to serve agendas that honestly have absolutely nothing to do with scientific discovery.
So I want you to really think about this for a second. What actually happens when science becomes a political weapon? Just imagine living in a reality where the fundamental laws of physics or the basic principles of biology aren't determined by experience or peer review. No, instead, they're dictated by a dictator's decree or maybe a corporate boardroom's profit margins. According to the sources we're looking at today, this isn't just some dystopian sci-fi movie. It's a repeated historical reality. When objective truth is systematically swapped out for an agenda, the consequences for society, our health, and human progress are, well, they're incredibly profound.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover science under threat, Aryan Physics in Germany, Lysenkoism in the Soviet Union, manufacturing doubt and denial, and finally, climate wars and manufactured doubt. Let's get right into it. Starting us off with Section 1, Science Under Threat. Looking back at the early to mid-20th century, totalitarian governments started to realize something pretty terrifying. Controlling the scientific narrative was just as important as controlling the military or the press. They literally used brute force to ensure scientific consensus aligned perfectly with their political ideologies. Our sources call this specific phenomenon hyper-politicized science. Now, let's be clear for a second. All science has some level of politics, right? Governments fund research, politicians use data for policy, that's normal. But hyper-politicized science, that is a whole different beast. It's when the scientific method itself is structurally hijacked. It's when an ideology decides what the truth must be before any experiments are done, and then uses state power, censorship, and even imprisonment to force scientists to agree. They literally just ignore the actual evidence. Moving on to Section 2, Aryan Physics in Germany. When the Third Reich came to power, they wanted to align literally every aspect of human knowledge with their racial ideology. And that led to a movement inside the scientific community explicitly called Aryan Physics. It's kind of wild to think about, right? Dividing the laws of nature by race. Two Nobel laureates, Philipp Leonard and Johannes Stark, actually led the charge here. They argued that true science was rooted in the German national spirit, and they championed older classical physics. On the flip side, they branded the groundbreaking work of Albert Einstein, specifically his theories of relativity and quantum mechanics, as Jewish physics. Just because his work relied on abstract math, and because Einstein himself was Jewish and a pacifist, they declared his universally applicable theories entirely invalid and tried to erase them from German education. Now, the real-world consequences of this ideological purity test were absolutely catastrophic for Germany. In 1933, they passed the Civil Service Law, which systematically kicked Jewish and socialist scientists out of their academic and civil jobs. The state was literally dictating scientific truth based on race instead of, actual experimentation. And what happened? A massive brain drain. Some of the greatest scientific minds in history just packed up and fled Germany. A lot of them headed to the US and the UK, which, ironically enough, ended up severely damaging Germany's own scientific and military progress in the long run. That brings us to Section 3, Lysenkoism in the Soviet Union. Right around that same time, over in the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, a totally different branch of science was being manipulated for absolute control. This wasn't physics, and it wasn't about racial ideology. But the mechanics of this hyper-politicization were incredibly similar. Enter Trofim Lysenko. Now, Lysenko wasn't some highly educated academic. He was actually an agricultural worker from Ukraine. But in 1927, he got praised in the state newspaper for a technique he used for planting peas. From that super modest start, he managed to play the Soviet political system to an astonishing degree. Fast forward to 1948, he gets the official backing of Joseph Stalin himself, and Lysenko basically becomes the absolute, unquestioned dictator of Soviet biology. And he didn't lose his grip on power until 1965, well after Stalin died. So what exactly was Lysenkoism anyway? Basically, Lysenko claimed you could fundamentally change a plant's genetics just by exposing it to environmental stress, like freezing cold weather, and then those brand new traits would just pass down to the next generation. It was an idea that perfectly fit the Marxist ideology of environmental conditioning. The problem? It completely contradicted globally accepted classical genetics. The proven science of Mendel and Morgan that showed genes are immutable units. But the Soviet state literally outlawed classical genetics entirely, calling it a corrupt bourgeois science. Crazy, right? I really want you to put yourself in the shoes of a legitimate biologist sitting in a crowded conference hall in 1948. A massive debate has been raging between real geneticists and Lysenko's loyal followers. And then, Lysenko stands up and reads this exact quote: "The Central Committee of the party has examined my report and approved it." Boom. With that single sentence, the debate was just over. Scientific consensus was officially replaced by political decree right then and there. The real geneticists in the room were immediately fired, and the entire field of biology in the USSR was basically crippled for decades. All right, on to Section 4, Manufacturing Doubt and Denial. So as those authoritarian regimes fell or shifted after World War II, the blatant state-enforced hijacking of science kind of faded out. But the manipulation of science? Oh, it definitely didn't disappear. It just evolved. It moved away from the blunt instrument of state coercion and stepped right into the slick, incredibly well-funded world of corporate public relations. Now, it's worth noting that anti-establishment movements pushing back on scientific consensus, they aren't brand new. You can see early examples of grassroots resistance from over a century ago. But our sources highlight a massive shift starting in the 1950s. That's when these scattered sentiments were organized, weaponized, and pumped full of cash by powerful corporate interests simply trying to protect their bottom line. And guys, here is the absolute smoking gun of that era. Doubt is our product. That is a direct quote. It's from an internal memo outlining the tobacco industry's public relations strategy. See, in the 1950s, the scientific consensus was getting really solid that smoking caused cancer. The tobacco industry knew they couldn't actually prove smoking was safe. The science was just too clear on that. So they completely shifted their goal. They realized they didn't actually need to win the scientific argument. They just needed to manufacture enough doubt in the public's mind to keep people buying cigarettes and to keep the government regulators off their backs. To pull this off, PR firms devised this highly effective, deeply insidious three-step playbook. Step 1, create alternative, industry-funded think tanks that look exactly like legitimate scientific institutions. Very sneaky. Step 2, constantly demand more research. By insisting the science is never quite settled, they successfully feigned an ongoing scientific debate, where among actual experts, none existed. And step 3, use that manufactured uncertainty to delay government regulation indefinitely. And honestly, it worked flawlessly for decades. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Climate Wars and Manufactured Doubt. So that exact same corporate playbook we just talked about, it was seamlessly copy-pasted into one of the most critical scientific discussions of our time, the climate wars. The fossil fuel industry literally took the tobacco industry's tactics to manufacture doubt about global warming. By the 1980s, the scientific consensus on CO2 emissions and planetary warming was becoming crystal clear. And the wildest part? Internal documents show the fossil fuel companies understood these climate risks perfectly well. But using the exact same PR firms and sometimes literally the exact same experts who defended tobacco, they went after the consensus. They funded think tanks to muddy the waters, weaponizing scientific skepticism not to find the truth, but to protect corporate profits. And exactly like tobacco, they successfully delayed crucial environmental action for years. I think this comparison brilliantly sums up the whole journey we've taken today. Just look at the difference here. On one side, you've got state politicization from the 30s to the 50s. It's driven by ideological purity, relying on brute force and censorship. That's your Aryan Physics and Lysenkoism. Then on the other side, you have modern corporate denialism, driven by profits, relying on PR campaigns, fake think tanks, and lobbying, like the tobacco and climate change denial movements we just covered. It's the exact same hijacking of science, but it evolved from the blunt instruments of dictators to the super sophisticated, well-funded deception of modern corporations. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. Whenever you hear a pundit or an industry spokesperson on TV demanding more research before we take action, you really have to look closely at their motives. Don't get me wrong, in genuine science, more research is fantastic. It's how we learn. But in the denial playbook we've been outlining today, the phrase, "we need more research," is totally weaponized. It's a calculated, deliberate ploy designed to freeze action, stall regulation, and maintain the status quo. It is not about uncovering the truth. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder. The next time you turn on the news or scroll through your feed and you see this fierce scientific debate over a public health crisis or an environmental policy, how are you going to evaluate it? Are you witnessing the rigorous, peer-reviewed pursuit of truth? Or are you watching a well-funded PR strategy designed to manufacture doubt and protect an agenda? Well, armed with this historical context, you've now got the tools to spot the difference. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious out there and definitely keep questioning what you see.